They need to be looking at NHS services to help people sort out in their head what it is, as you heard about food addiction. So it needs to be part of an overall strategy, not just one bit. But I would say that at least the government is thinking about obesity, at least it's thinking about the second most preventable cause of cancer that we have. And going forward, the cause of most illness that we see in our consulting room. So it's a start, but it's certainly
not the whole answer. Can I just before I go to Amanda, do we know after the 2 years that it maintains a positive effect, these weight loss?
We know that because, as the lady says, it's not been around long enough, and it does have side effects. And to be honest, if we hadn't introduced behavioural change after 2 years, then I think we'd have to say, look, the side effects of the drugs probably don't outweigh the
we need to mix it with behavioural therapies and deep down looking at your relationship with food and issues in your whole life as a whole. But for me, it's amazing. It was absolutely amazing. It was exactly what I needed, and it did what it was supposed to do. I recommend it, but not in isolation.
You ended up going private. The NHS didn't prescribe.
I did, yeah. I mean, I was in the pre-diabetic zone. I've got high blood pressure, cholesterol, and but unfortunately, I wasn't bad enough for the NHS to be able to help me. My BMI was high, was in the overweight / obese, but not clinically, not hugely obese, you know. So I ended up going private, and it was the best option for me. But I mean, I worry that it's pretty much if I hadn't done that, I'm going through menopause, and so I was putting on weight anyway, and there was a whole raft of issues that were going on with me. So it was taking that positive step and doing it myself. But what if I hadn't had the money? What if I didn't have the resources?
Well, yes, and the weight came off. Is that the point?
It did. It absolutely did. I mean, it amazed me just how quickly the weight came off.
Is that because you don't want to eat at all?
Absolutely. It stopped the hunger from very, very early on. I mean, I remember after the first week I'd lost like 8 pounds or something at the end of the first week, and I was like, well, golly, that can't be healthy. Well, I don't feel hungry and I don't feel ill. And although the weight loss did slow down, because as anybody that's ever been on a diet knows, the first week you always lose more, it was sustained, and it was actually the magic potion that I'd been looking for. However, you can't use it on its own. It needs to be mixed with other measures. Otherwise, it's just a quick fix that will give you a holiday body. And I've heard that more than once.
Have you kept it off?
Well, I've been off 4 months now, and I would say that I haven't kept it all off. I would say I'm probably about 4 or 5 pounds heavier than when I came off, and that worries me. But I'm taking action now because I can honestly see it being a yo-yo thing for something's right unless you nip it in the back before it starts. So I'm taking measures now because I don't want to go back on it. Although it was brilliant, long term I don't want to do it. Like going out to school that being lighter is healthier for me than say diabetes or any other option that was available at that time. However, ideally I'd like to go to that
What was the experience was? Claire, I'd like to come back to you as a GP and someone on the front lines of this. Do you have faith in talk about how this is treated? Does it need to be done in the right way?
Pourquoi? 你仲想唔想玩嗰啲 after school 嗰啲 sports club 嘅？ 如果 drama club 翻嚟，你想唔想去啊？如果 drama club 翻嚟，你想唔想去啊？嚇？聽唔到啊 ？No? Yes? No? OK。今日你喺 library 嗰度，跟住爸爸接你，跟住即刻跟住我哋去 physical theatre，OK？
Joyce, Darren Jones, pushing Swedish back to try and chase price rises. Next, today was a 70. Well, there's this. First time below the 10% target in 2021. What's the going on behind the scenes? What is it that's caused this problem? And is it right across the board and all those measures that matter? Yes, it's got about half of the sets of stability losses of stabilising like this. It's a lot of notice rules and energy prices before those prices went up. That's an important detail. But overall, when you look at the headline number, cost of sales down to 1.7%, below the target. You also want to look at services inflation and core inflation, which strips out some volatile factors. That is also down. Core inflation is also particularly services inflation, which the bank is watching very carefully, has also come down 35%. So it's not going in the right direction. It's not stalling. So towards the end, as I mentioned, the rising energy price cap increasing will mean that you'll be a dip. It's highly likely to be a dip below the target of 2%, pop back over it in October. Nonetheless, it will be from a lower base. What does that mean? I think the biggest impact of this is if the Bank of England will feel more relaxed about the inflation projection from here on in, and the likelihood of interest rate cuts, further interest rate cuts this year has got even stronger.
Right, cuts plural, because we were sort of expecting one in November, weren't we? But you think maybe December as well?
Yeah, I think it's definitely it definitely will be under consideration. There'll be other data they'll want to look at, but that data, the jobs data, the earnings data, is also going in the right direction. You see some interesting things in mortgage markets in the past week or so, that they have been coming down, those mortgage rates, those fixed-term mortgage rates, but they seem to stabilise, some of them just starting to creep back up again. But yeah, this is the sort of number that helps underpin the dovish argument on the monetary policy division. It's important in and of itself. It does raise that interesting question for government policy, though, about indexation of a wide range of benefits. It's unlucky timing in some ways. 1.7% is likely to be the rise for various benefits and universal credit at a time, I think Paul Johnson was saying this earlier in the show, when the state pension will be going up by more than double, 4.1%. So that is quite a difference.
It makes it starker, doesn't it? And politically starker.
It does, and it comes at a time when we're hearing about tough choices in terms of tax rises, some potentially tough choices in terms of welfare. There were reforms to the work capability assessments that are already in the pipeline, for example, Liz Kendall on that issue. We've also been hearing that the black hole, as they call it, in the public finances, the hole that they have to fill, probably mainly with tax rises. The IFS last week was saying it was 25 billion a year, more like 40 billion if you are to truly end austerity in all government departments. So that is quite something if that number is the number that we see in the budget at the end.
Yeah, and Paul Johnson also making an interesting point that if you're depending on fiscal drag to get a bit more in your government coffers, this doesn't help with that.
It doesn't, but I mean, it should be a fairly temporary dip for the 2% target, as I say, because of the energy prices coming back up again. It's obviously hardly good news. I mean, it's obviously, the bottom line is it's good news. You know, to the extent that inflation, we should stress that on occasion, even as an economics editor, that you know, it's wrong to say that inflation shock is over. But it wasn't always preordained that the inflation that reached double digits will sort of work its way out of the system in a couple of years. It kind of has done. You can look sort of maybe start to align on the 3 years of the inflation shock and be thankful that the oil price shock that may have happened in the Middle East just to be done. Vice Liz Van, our economics editor. Thank you.
It's 38 minutes past 5 minutes to that.
Good morning, Emma. Good morning, Justin. And good morning to the new England football manager. The German Thomas Tuchel is set to be unveiled later today as the permanent replacement for Gareth Southgate. The FA has called a press conference for 1:30 this afternoon, where it's expected former Chelsea manager will be announced as the new national team boss, who will sign an 18-month deal to take him to the next World Cup. The German perspective on this appointment now. Taufik Khalil is a German football journalist based in Munich and followed Thomas Tuchel very closely last season in particular. Good morning, Taufik. Good morning. A bit of surprise at this news here in the UK around Tuchel's appointment. What is the reaction in Germany?
Germany is huge. The newspapers are full of it. It's a huge discussion going on. You said Morgan, you said Thomas Tuchel, and no one will try to cheer for him. And at least not at Bayern Munich, because anyway, he separated with Bayern Munich. The way his time worked out at Bayern Munich was not that crying a lot of tears that he left the club some months ago. It was a very complicated event. Most people never really appreciate Thomas Tuchel coming to Munich, because Munich is a city which stands for beer, for life, for eating heavy, meaty dishes and things like that. And Thomas Tuchel stands more for drinking still water, warm still water, eating salad, weekend things like that. And this is something most people really didn't have in mind when they waited for the next Bayern Munich coach.
Vegan is the new manager of England. Who knew? He drinks warm water as well. What about the relationship, Taufik, that he has with his players? I'm just thinking, of course, of him reconnecting with Harry Kane, who, of course, he had at Bayern Munich last year, and now he's back working with England captain.
Yeah, well, I think the relationship with Harry Kane worked out very well. Well, but it was Harry Kane's first year in Munich. Harry Kane came and it was a perfect season for him from striking, from goals, not from titles, because Thomas Tuchel is the first coach since I don't know how many years who left by Munich in his last season without a title. And Harry Kane still without a title, so I don't know how Harry Kane sees Thomas Tuchel. Maybe now he's on for the World Championship title with Thomas Tuchel. Harry would take his spot. The thing is that it was not only Harry Kane, it was other players who really had a bad relationship with Thomas Tuchel. Because let's go back to last summer, not this summer, the year before. The team was in Asia, and Thomas Tuchel suddenly started a discussion out of nothing, and he asked for a holding six. Joshua Kimmich, who played there, an excellent play there, was gone from one moment to another. Leon Goretzka was back from one moment to another. Thomas Tuchel said, I need a holding six. The discussions were on for Paulinho, were on for Declan Rice. Now he has Declan Rice in his team, okay? And Thomas Tuchel, but the mood between the players and Thomas Tuchel was not very good. So I think that was one of the reasons why the season didn't really work out very well. It was not a good relationship.
Well, we'll see how he fares as England manager after his appointment, which is expected to be confirmed, as we say, later this afternoon. Taufik Khalil, German football journalist in Munich. But many thanks for your thoughts this morning. And just finally, the cricket, quick update from Multan. The Pakistan tail frustrating England on day 2 of the second test. The home side 358 for 8 at lunch. The afternoon session due to get underway in around about 10 minutes. And you can follow that with Test Match Special over on BBC Sounds. Nice banking, more or less, is at 9. Has been half a good. More detail. This week, 60 people, incomes of £50 million, £3 billion in income tax. We look at the numbers that describe the tax affairs of the super rich. A spokesman for the water industry told Radio 4 listeners that water bills have fallen in real terms since 2010. A loyal listener disagrees, and he's got a spreadsheet. And I talk about mental arithmetic under pressure with author Rob Eastaway and BBC political editor Chris Mason. That's more or less with me, Tim Harford, on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds in half an hour.
not my forte. I won't be looking forward to that, although I love that programme. I look at the weather. Today will be mild, very mild in fact, but still unsettled and wet for most. Spells of rain, heavy in places, drier and warmer
Tuesday, ready for Emma Barnett, customer at the time is 27 minutes to 9. Caroline Nicholson.
Inflation fell to 1.7% in September, down from 2.2% in August. It's the first time in more than 3 years that the rate, as measured by the Consumer Prices Index, has fallen below the Bank of England's 2% target. Government sources have told the BBC that the Chancellor is now looking to find £40 billion in through tax and spending measures. Rachel Reeves has told ministers that filling the so-called £22 billion spending black hole will only see public services maintained. Israel says it will address US concerns about the amount of aid getting to Gaza after a stern warning endorsed by America's top diplomat. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken signed a letter saying some military aid to Israel could end unless the situation improves within 30 days. Medical experts have warned the government that NHS obesity services in England will face unprecedented demand from people wanting new weight loss injections under new plans. They want an urgent review to look at how access to the treatment can be ensured.
Thank you. It is 26 minutes to 9. The United Nations has warned of catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Lebanon. Huge numbers of people displaced by conflicts, Israeli attacks on Hezbollah positions across the country. The collapse of the Lebanese economy in recent years has already left like 80% of the population in poverty. Hundreds of thousands more now have fled their homes. But, as our correspondent John Head has been discovering, with plenty of experience from past conflicts, many Lebanese are finding different ways to help those food families.
So I'm strolling along Cambridge's famous Corniche, seaside promenade, popular with joggers, fishermen, and street vendors. But these days there are also tents, groups of families sitting around who've been displaced by the Israeli bombing campaign. More than 1 million people, 1/5 of Lebanon's population, has been uprooted by the conflict. Tens of thousands of them here in the capital in just the last few weeks. The needs are enormous. The government is unable to meet them. So ordinary people stepped in to help each other. When you come to your restaurants in Beirut's Hamra district, like so many parts of the city, it's accommodating huge numbers of people who've been displaced by the conflict. And this restaurant, Lezian, is doing its bit to help, offering free meals to those who want to leave their homes. My name is Shab Hamdan. I'm the operation manager of Lezian. So what are you cooking here? It's rice and meat with the sauce, with the like pepper sauce, distributed to people. Tell me why you started this. As you know, there's always bad situation in Lebanon. Now this is more displaced people from south, from Beirut suburbs. We are trying to do something, and as we are at the restaurant, we are preparing food for these people. We just help them with at least 1 meal per day. Because you know the prices now are really high, and maybe they're coming without their money, and some of them they lost already their house, their job. So we are trying to do something. So now we reach like 500 meals daily. You know, some apartments, 4 to 5 families, like 20 people in the same house. So we are trying our best to reach what we can do for them only. And you're still running a normal restaurant business on top of this? Exactly. That's the business going down like 70% from before. But at the same time, we're trying to work that so we're zipping through Beirut's crazy traffic in the back of the bike. We can carry food to the southern family. They've had to take in a lot of relatives in just one small month.
You never feel safe. Do people play at least private sections of schools visit house
They do just, and we continue with the multiple areas that like this group. There's a lot of applications for schools for that now. I suspect even just with our supported areas, when they can see homes, they could stay out of the conflict threatening us. These are the ones that have this group. Of course, they may reserve as well as out of anger about this apparently supporting areas like that's and so forth, but the demonstrating universities that are becoming clear as to whether it is certainly demonstrating conflicts and so forth in other places. It does make them accustomed to helping each other and solving it, something that we automatically start doing. But it's a tough conflict that it's experiencing us and what we can do. Why will that matter? The size of the study matter?
Architecture is particularly focused on how we can prevent common chronic diseases. We've already heard today in the programme that the pressures on the NHS in many conditions are preventable or at least delayable. And what we're really trying to do is to see how we can better detect diseases early, intervene early, and thereby prevent them, and therefore reduce pressure on the NHS, but also improve the lives of millions of people in many conditions. As you said, diabetes, heart disease, cancers, mental health disorders are preventable, but we need to find better ways to do that. And because our study is so large, and actually now we have the largest number of people from younger and working age adults, from ethnic minorities, and from more deprived populations, we can really see how best to prevent those across the whole country.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people studies, so in other words, it tracks people as they go along and get healthier or less healthy, etc. Do you have a kind of a sense of when you begin to make discoveries, as it were, that are actionable?
So again, because the study is now so large, because it covers the whole of the UK really for the first time, and we'll be able to make the discoveries much sooner. For more common conditions like diabetes, heart disease, or common cancers within the next 2 to 3 years. For less common diseases, again, some of the cancers, mental health disorders, etc., it will take a bit longer. But certainly within the next 5 years, there will be a huge number of discoveries that will be possible from this resource, and we're opening up the resource to researchers across the UK, to the NHS, to academia, to industries that can get the maximum benefit from the data that people have kind of donated to us.
And what is that data? What do people do?
So people join up online, and anyone can join up from now across the country by going to our website, architecture.org.uk, and then they can send online, they fill in a questionnaire online and book an appointment to attend one of our many clinics. So we have over 200 clinics across the country to give a blood sample, have some basic physical measurements taken, and then using that information to combine the data, the genetic data, the questionnaire data, the linked NHS data, to really build what is the most detailed picture ever of our nation's health, and for the individuals we can go back to them in the future and give them the option of knowing their risk of disease and how they can prevent those diseases in the future.
That's the point, isn't it? It is, well, from the title, Our Future Health, it is very much future-oriented, but also interestingly future-oriented, because you think of it being a good thing, like kind of nationwide, for what you're saying there, it's also a good thing potentially for you as an individual.
Indeed, and that's what's really unique about the programme. That of course, we're very grateful for people taking part to help future generations, but they can also help themselves. And as I said, we're particularly keen to have people
Survived 120 years. So, I think post-COVID, I think the curator Leslie, they've really struggled in terms of trying to get applications, just because I think there's been applications completely overloaded since COVID, because they didn't receive any funding at all during that period. But it is a problem, and it is an issue. And a cultural heritage site, I really don't know. It's obviously, this is something that the people that run the place are going to have to look at in terms of for the future.
Because when you say applications for grant funding is the grants that it would have had in the past, and you're saying those grants have just dried up. And it needs £250,000 quid, right quick.
Yeah, well, I spoke to, because I only found out about this yesterday, and I spoke to Leslie, the curator, and he did say, because I said, man, that's a lot of money to expect to get through in such a short period of time. He said that will actually keep the club running until summer of next year. So this isn't just something to, because I said, you're going to get people saying, hold on a minute, if you need this right now, then what happens in a month's time and 2 months' time? Do you need another 250,000? Is it going to be that difficult for it to be impossible to sustain that? And he said, no, that'll keep the club running for right up until next summer.
Well, if it is going to be sustained, I guess someone possibly abroad who knows the Smiths, sees the album and understands the need for the money might step in. But my choice, thanks a lot.
I found it so interesting about international, not far from where, of course, the BBC now, and where I also grew up, so very interesting to hear that. But let's talk about the changing sides of potentially what we want from our restaurants and from those with Michelin stars, because they were once the ultimate status symbol for restaurants, but things are changing, or certainly for some. A restaurant in Tuscany has become the latest to renounce the award in favour of a more informal and less stuffy dining experience. Benedetto Rulo, the owner of this restaurant, said many diners were deterred by the prospect of fussy food in a formal restaurant, saying one should be able to go to a fine restaurant in a t-shirt, flip-flops and shorts. I'm sure there are some opinions on this. Chef Asma Khan, owner of the London restaurant Darjeeling Express, and Tim Hayward, food critic for the Financial Times, are both on the line now. I'll come to you, Asma, first. Good morning. What do you make of the idea that we're moving away from formal experiences? You don't want the stuffy things anymore.
Absolutely. I think COVID was a game changer because everyone saw death very close. Many suffered.
And to tell us more about this project, we're joined now by Robin Yassin Hassan, its Chief English Editor. Robin, thanks for joining us on the Media Show. First of all, just help us understand, I just said your job title, but help us understand what your role involves.
Well, I'm the Chief English Editor, which involves sometimes I can write investigations and reports myself. Most of the time I'm monitoring investigations and reports and sometimes witness testimony, etc., which we produce it. So I'm everything I'm preparing
find ways of documenting all of the different types of material that you just described?
Yeah, well, we've got this huge archive, all of this documentation and some photographs and proposed visuals and some of the aspirations of that. All of this information is being added to our archive, and we've used a software called Curious Brigade, which is the same software that's actually none of our papers investigation. And that gives you a bit of proof, a visual representation of data that shows the connections between entities. So, and it's research. So, for example, if you type into the system a name like Abdullah, you'll see a visual representation everywhere where this guy's name has come up. Every document that he's been mentioned in, every prison or base or other site that he's been associated with, any administrative part of ISIS will be connected.
And finally, let me ask you about one investigation that you've been particularly involved in relation to the stadium prison in Raqqa, in Syria. Tell us about that and the particular work you did there.
Well, the stadium in Raqqa, as the name suggests, was a sports stadium, which was then taken over by various people as the Syrian revolution progressed. The first attempt, after the Assad regime had been kicked out of Raqqa, the first attempt was actually media, civil society, media people tried to set up a media centre there. That only lasted for a couple of months, and they were evicted by Islamist and jihadi militias who made a Sharia court there. Then ISIS kicked out those militias, took over the whole of Raqqa, and it used it as its largest security prison, as it called it, in Syria. And there were 46 rooms in the basement of this stadium where they detained people. We relied there specifically on the documents and the forensic evidence that we found in the stadium. Also 11 witness testimonies, ex-prisoners, plus interviews with civil engineers who knew about the building and its construction, and the civil activists, and a former jailer. And out of all of that, and of course we've got hours and hours of witness testimony, which is usually ex-prisoners standing in the rooms in which they were detained and tortured, talking about what happened to them. And we've produced 4 different investigations based on that one prison.
It's an extraordinary undertaking. Robin, thank you very much indeed for describing it. That's Robin Yassin Assad, the Chief English Editor.
And as mentioned, one of the aims of the ISIS Prisons Museum is to preserve evidence for future prosecutions. To understand this dimension of the project's work, I'm joined by Yvonne McDermott, who's Professor of Law at Swansea University. Hello everyone, thanks for coming on the programme. Just how useful are materials gathered by journalists in international prosecutions for, say, war crimes or crimes against humanity? Because there have been some pretty high-profile examples of journalists actually giving evidence. I mean, the BBC's Jeremy Bowen testified at The Hague in the trial of a Bosnian war criminal, for example.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the use of journalistic content isn't really anything new. As you say, we've had some very high-profile examples of journalists testifying for the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia and the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. And more recently, then, we've had journalists testify before the International Criminal Court in The Hague in a number of cases. So the use of journalistic content in this way is nothing new, but I do think it's something that's going to hasten with the advent of open source evidence, and courts around the world are recognising how this kind of evidence, basically stuff that's freely available on the internet, can be used in the prosecution and proving international crimes. And journalists play a big role in that, because often it's journalists who are at the forefront of this, verifying this content, reporting on it, checking that it is what it's supposed to be.
And what standards would you use, that you journalist interviews or photos or videos, what standards need to be met in order to tell us about verification?
So I'm an evidence law professor, and I often train investigators, lawyers, to different legal systems. And one question I always get asked is, what does the International Criminal Court require? require. Perhaps unhelpfully, it's not like there's a checklist that says if you want your evidence to be admissible, you have to do A, B, and C. So a typical lawyer's answer, but it depends. Basically, the International Criminal Court has quite a liberal approach to the admission of evidence. They'll admit a wide range of evidence so long as it's deemed to be relevant, but also importantly reliable, and that it's not prejudicial to the right of the accused to admit it. So how do we show that something's reliable? That will come down to things like the chain of custody of the evidence. So things that Robin was mentioning there, making sure that it's very clearly documented, this is where we found this is how we preserved it, that's all going to be relevant in determining the reliability of a piece of evidence. By today, there are actually dedicated smartphone apps that are out there designed specifically to help people who are documenting videos and images if they want them to be admitted in court. So that does things like capture the metadata, store the securely, and ensure that it's been preserved.
And you were talking about Robin. I mean, the ISIS Prisons Museum, when I first heard about it, I found it so fascinating and so interesting, but also very optimistic in a sense, because you think, this is journalism being used for the good, in the sense of not just helping families, but also potentially helping future prosecutions. But are there other examples, other archives like that have successfully led to prosecutions?
Absolutely. So when I was listening to Robin speaking, I was thinking about the Caesar files, an initiative to gather basically smuggle photographs from prisons in Syria out, and they've been used. For example, there was a case in Koblenz, Germany, a couple of years ago, which used evidence from the Caesar files. There's also a great stream of archiving projects in the last decade or so. Perhaps one of the most well known is the Syrian Archive. It's preserved something like 3.5 million videos from the conflict in Syria online, and their archival material has been used in prosecutions in Germany, in France.
And I was mentioning Jeremy Bowen earlier, but is it fairly common or common for journalists to testify in international criminal court?
I would say it's not uncommon. So we've had, for example, there was a case in the Mali situation in the International Criminal Court recently where a Dutch journalist had basically arrived in Timbuktu and found a filing cabinet full of documents that were passed to the prosecution.
花晒嗰件事，你睇下，我唔知你差唔差到電㗎。你自己睇下，你差唔差到電？爛晒。
Carefully. Looks like a big egg. Or is it a big egg?
Well,
But it's been tough. It's been really tough for all the producers, and that's been well discussed. I think what we're talking about here is really where is viewing going over the next 5 to 10 years. And the PSPs have definitely benefited from a distribution system which is primarily linear. And now it's shifting towards a streaming environment. And some of these ideas need to contend with the fact that also the kinds of content that are being consumed is fundamentally different. We know that short form and mid form video is growing exponentially. Long form video at best flat. Interestingly, streaming services are not growing at the same pace as they were.
And they're spending less money now, aren't they?
They're spending less money. But the PSPs have done a pretty good job in growing their viewing in what's called broadcast version. Actually better than many broadcasters around the world. So there's a lot to be encouraged by, but the question is where might things be in 5 to 10 years' time?
And as you say, that deficit, that channel deficit, is in part connected to major shifts in the advertising industry, and I know that's a side of the business you follow closely, because your production company makes programmes and adverts, which is, I think, quite unusual. Not many producers do this. Why do you choose to?
Well, it helps to have more than one revenue stream, certainly in the middle of COVID and the cost of living crisis. It has been tough for everyone. But we also believe in ideas being generated in different shapes and sizes. That's sort of the philosophy of our company.
So does it compromise your approach to editorial, your editorial approach?
We're very clear. So we have two types of content. We have commissioned content. So the programme we're going to discuss is a commissioned programme by BBC Arts. It has no brand association at all. Then there are kinds of programmes like Super Surgeons on Channel 4 that's been created in partnership with Macmillan, for example, where film or product placement where the brand is sponsoring the program but also appearing in it in an editorially justified way. And then another business is Zappos, and that's commercial activity that some and that helps us sort of keep the whole machine moving.
You do? Look at I.
Well, you mentioned this document, spend some time.
你係咪食嘢喺度？
It's called The Man Who
你食嘢嗰度俾細邊你見到？
BBC Two and iPlayer came this Friday. Here's a little look.
Former waiter is buying MGM UA for $1.2 billion.
Serious Italian movie mogul and the world's largest media company.
Hollywood outsider with a murky past who has yet to account for all the money it took to buy MGM.
So what was the pitch when you started talking to BBC and perhaps to others too about this idea and you thought, well, I've got to get this down to 30 seconds, 60 seconds to get their attention? How did you pitch it? Well, this is a story about a larger-than-life character who sort of let off a hand grenade in Hollywood in the early 1990s, and it's an extraordinary story and brilliantly told by the director John Dower. It's a really playful film that allows us to sort of peek around the corner a little bit about how deals are done in Hollywood, why it attracts so much investment. And the interesting thing about this period was that a lot of the studios were being taken over by large international companies. In the case of Columbia, Sony, and Murdoch was taking over Fox. And there was it was in the late 80s, early 90s. So there's this big debate about sort of who owns the storytellers, which caused a lot of consternation. You can compare that to the period we're in now, where an increasing number of studios are owned by tech companies, and questions are asked about sort of what's the motive of these ownership models, and will they affect the editorial decisions of the people who run the studios. So the macro issue hanging over the documentary is this tussle over who controls the storytellers, to use your phrase, but it all revolves around one man. Just introduce us to him and the story that you try and trace out across the film. So Giancarlo Giannetti is a wonderful character. He was an orphan from Morbietto. He worked on steamer ships and was apparently a waiter in London, served Winston Churchill, but ended up becoming a very successful businessman in Italy, and through a series of deals ended up acquiring MGM Studios. The trouble was the way in which he went about it attracted the attention of a character in our film called Jeff Isaacs, who's a public prosecutor who looked at the way in which the finance was raised, and it turned out that Moretti was raising a lot of money from Credit DNA in a way that wasn't entirely, that was starting to get paid, and was the subject of subsequent court cases.
So Jason's clearly a sort of charismatic guy. I know when he bought the studio, he had a real lion brought to the press conference. You got him on board for your programme, and then I think the relationship ultimately broke down. Just explain about that, and also whether you had any qualms about platforming him in the show.
Well, this is the other sort of thing about the way the films have been made, because it's partially an observational documentary, and we didn't quite know what was going to happen when we started filming. But it's also a brilliantly structured forensic story about the court as well. So it combines different aspects of documentary storytelling. You're absolutely right that the film actually, all the way through, plays with an argument that we had, and the director John Dower had with Giancarlo Moretti about what the program should be called. And as you guys will know, the decision about the title of a program or a film happens very late. It's usually the program controllers and the people at the top that will make that decision once they've seen the film. So you don't start the process knowing what the title is. But lucky Giancarlo, he kind of wants to insist that he's going to influence the title. Of course, the music based on the BBC, you can't have it at all.
What title did he want?
Well, you'll have to watch the film. It had a number of titles, some of which were follow business biography. They were quite self-referential. But the point being is that John brilliantly decides to open up this argument all the way through the film. And through doing that, he tells us something very interesting about how the subjects of documentaries agree to be in them. What are their motives? What stories are they trying to tell? And what do their rights are? And what are their rights? Well, rather wonderfully, we allow him to have a say. He talks very willingly about his life and his experiences. But at the same time, we absolutely don't allow him to his statements to go unchecked, and that's partially entertaining because many other colourful characters come in and give their side of the story.
And why did the sale go ahead? I mean, it seems that it was just too good to be true. It says something about a state of Hollywood that they put more into this. There's definitely different face value.
Hollywood's definitely going through a difficult time, and actually the chairman of the Sarah that sold the studio to Ferretti is in the film, is a fantastic character. And explains how the interrelationship between sort of money and banking and ownership in Hollywood, how it works. And of course, this is sort of writ large what's going on every day when people are pitching their stories, trying to raise money for their projects, but also how people are taking over the institutions that make those projects. So it works on a number of levels. It's very playful, hugely entertaining, and it draws in the mythology of what was going on in Hollywood at the time. Thelma and Louise was being made when all this was going on, and it nearly never got released because they couldn't afford the prints and the marketing and the promotion. So the whole thing kind of almost imploded around him just as he was getting going.
Is there a parallel documentary to be made about what's happening now with a new era of people wrestling for control of the storytellers? You mentioned earlier that tech has more and more influence over who's making the biggest bucks in terms of both TV and film.
We shall have to see. People will look back, I'm sure, on this period with great interest. I think it certainly seems to be that this was a period with hugely colourful characters, very, very wonderful films being made, and it sort of reflects, I think, a shift from Hollywood being run by people who were producers to being run by investors and more the implications of that work.
David Abraham, sounds brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on the media show. The programme, The Man Who Definitely Didn't Steal Hollywood, is on BBC Two at 9 p.m. on Friday.
Now, before we end this edition of the media show, you may have seen that an entertainment journalist has gone viral for a number of her celebrity interviews and for the fact that she's now received an apology from the Hollywood actor Anne Hathaway. The journalist in question is Shashti Burke. She interviewed Anne Hathaway as part of a press junket for the 2012 film Les Miserables, so this is a while back.
And just to explain, a junket is a way to promote a film, usually, where the actors and directors are lined up to do a series of interviews, often in front of the background, advertising the film. The journalists brought in one after the other in a long line to do a really often very short interview. They're usually in hotels, and as I said at the top, at 8. But let's have a listen to Shashti and Hathaway. This compilation is the most uncomfortable moments from the interview resurfaced and went viral. So I was going to ask you to do the first question, and I'll sing it to you, and you can sing like the answer. Well, I won't be doing that, but you're more than welcome to.
Kirsti Flagg from TV2 Norway.
Okay, I will try.
So were there any awkward moments like this on set? Because you had to sing at the bar?
Do you feel that love was more passionate back then, or people would sacrifice more for love than they do today? No? Do you remember your first crush? No. That's awesome. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Well, joining us on the media show, Shashti Burke. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I know you'll have seen this a few times, but when you hear it back, do you still wince?
Cringe? Yes, I did feel cringe.
And there are going to be people thinking, hold on, this happened in 2012, why are we talking about it on the media show in 2024? What's the reason?
Well, the story began actually in August when I posted an interview with Blake Lively that I did in 2016. And the reason why I posted it then was because it was a very uncomfortable interview that didn't go well at all. And after I posted it, it went viral. Also for the reason that Blake Lively was being criticized for her promo tour for her movie that was just released, It Ends With Us. So that kind of added to the tension around her. And then that kind of made me want to explain what had happened behind the scenes of that interview, because a lot of people on YouTube were taking my interview and having opinions about it, and there were all these like weird conspiracy theories around it. So I had decided that I wanted to go out and explain what had happened myself, and that's when I started these new videos on YouTube showing when things are going great and when things are not going so great, and that's what happened with this Anne Hathaway interview.
And you've received an apology from Anne Hathaway recently, but watching it back, did you think, well, maybe I put her in a difficult situation by singing the questions and asking her to sing the answers back?
Not really. I think, you know, if you watch how the other actors reacted to it, I think sometimes, you know, you're in these situations and people sit there, like you're saying, for hours and do these like 4 or 5 minute interviews back to back to back to back. So most actors do appreciate when you try to do something different. But she didn't. And I totally respect that she didn't want to take back. But for me, it was the tone of everything. And I think that's why people reacted to it, that it wasn't very nice. I think you can always say you don't want to answer a question, but you can do it in a, you know, in a polite way and not kind of sabotage the rest of the interview because of that.
Shachi, I don't know if you saw this, but the journalist Simon Mills has been following the furore around your videos and has written in the Times newspaper, Hathaway's act of contrition, the apology, is a huge crossing the floor moment for show business media, the content maker and content provider, now on a similar footing, demanding equal respect. It is the internet that has done this. So he's saying that this is a big moment for how junkets work. Do you agree?
Wow, I didn't see that at all, so I'm definitely going to read that. Well, I'm not sure. The thing is, what's happening right now, which is different from when I did YouTube. Back then, you used to get a hard copy, or you used to get a card with the interview on. Now, they will send you a link with the interview, and if there's anything in that interview that the studio or company or someone doesn't like, they will cut that out before you even see the interview. So the censorship is much stronger. So I think this probably won't happen because it's going to get censored before the journalist even gets the interview.
And Shachi, I want to talk to you more widely about press service in a minute because I've done a few myself.
This suggests around £40 billion spending pressure on history, which looks like the Chancellor will attempt to meet her budget with a combination of tax rises and spending reductions in certain areas.
An emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council has heard dire warnings about the humanitarian situation in northern Gaza, where Israel is mounting a fresh ground offensive against Hamas. Envoy Dame Barbara Woodward described conditions as harrowing and said the devastating conflict must be brought to an end. The US said it was watching to make sure Israel did not have a policy of starvation in the area. The head of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, Philippe Lazzarini, said in a news conference in Berlin that Gaza was now a kind of unlivable wasteland, most of its infrastructure destroyed.
I have to say Gaza is a place which horrifies the most humanitarian workers. People are just on a daily basis struggling to stay alive with kind of haggard automatic movement, struggling against disease and struggling also against hunger.
Israel's ambassador to the UN said the problem in Gaza was not a lack of aid, but that Hamas was stealing humanitarian supplies. Our special correspondent Fergal Keane is in Jerusalem as to report on the plight of civilians in northern Gaza.
Groups of men are digging through the rubble in this neighborhood of Gaza City. A hand sticks out from the pile of masonry. It is dust covered, a streak of blood on the fingers and wrist. In the background, a young girl is watching. She is motionless and seems to be in shock. A man standing beside a collapsed building describes how his young brother saw their parents die.
I took out my younger brother at the last moment. He told me I heard my mum and dad reciting the Shahada. I don't know how we can go back to our home in the north without my mother or father or brothers.
The humanitarian crisis in the north is described as catastrophic by aid agencies. America has accused Israel of refusing or impeding up to 90% of aid to northern Gaza in the last Jabalia's Kamal Adwan Hospital. We are talking about collective punishment for the health system in the Gaza Strip. Consequently, we urge the world to intervene and impose their humanity over the Israeli army, to open humanitarian corridors that allow the entrance of medical tools, delegations, fuel and food, so that we can provide humanitarian services for the children, newborn babies and patients who are in need. Israel says it is addressing American concerns. The army says it only targets terror cells and released a video of what it said was Hamas firing from within a clinic in Jabalia. In a narrow alley in the camp, several ambulances are parked. Most of those inside them are dead. Bodies are piled up, all ages. Blood seeps from the forehead of a small child. Every day, people in Jabalia plead for peace, for food and medicine. They plead, but those bare voices cannot make it happen.
The White House sent a letter to Israel earlier this week threatening to suspend supplies of US weapons until aid loads were allowed into Gaza. America's statement sympathy for Israel and Gaza, international editor Jeremy.
The letter had immediate results. For the first time since the beginning of October, Israel allowed aid convoys to enter Gaza, though not yet on the scale requested by the US. Whether the letter can end Gaza's humanitarian catastrophe, particularly in the absence of a ceasefire, is another matter. Israel has been reminded that US law restricts arms transfers to countries that block US aid and has been given 30 days to remedy matters. The US presidential election happens within that time frame. Before voting day, the US would not restrict weapon shipments to Israel, especially given the fact that the Israelis are on the brink, potentially, of a much wider war with Iran. If Vice President Kamala Harris wins, the Biden administration will be able to keep up the pressure on Israel until her inauguration in January, if it wishes to. It is likely to be a different story if former President Donald Trump gets his second term. The letter is a belated attempt to impose pressure on Israel by suggesting there'll be consequences if Joe Biden's wishes are ignored. He's been convinced that the best way to influence Israel is to offer unconditional support. But his wishes have often been ignored by Prime Minister Netanyahu. Whether or not Israel listens to America's demands on Gaza, as Joe Biden enters his last lap as president, it is clear that his attempt to stop the spread of the Gaza war across the Middle East has failed.
The authorities in Lebanon say 16 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes on the southern city of Nabatea, including the mayor. The regional governor said a municipal building has been hit as officials met to coordinate humanitarian relief. The Lebanese Prime Minister has condemned the attack. Israel says it has struck dozens of Hezbollah targets in the area. Our correspondent Jonathan Head sent this report from Beirut.
This was Marwaniyah in southern Lebanon this morning. Israeli airstrikes, one after the other, pummeling the town and sending huge plumes of smoke and dust into the air. Just down the road in Nabatea, they were going through the rubble of what had been the town hall. Somewhere underneath it was the mayor, Ahmed Tahir. According to the Lebanese government, he'd been holding a meeting to discuss Nabatea's humanitarian needs when the Israeli plane struck. Ahmed Tahir was affiliated with Hezbollah, like most officials in this town, but he was a civilian, so local people, and a popular mayor. The Lebanese Prime Minister, Najib Mikati, condemned the attack. We are under continuous assault and clear violation of international law, he said. Why is the world silent? Israel says it only hit military targets in Nabatea. It conducted more than 340 airstrikes across Lebanon on the first 2 days of this week. The count for today is still being tallied.
Keir Starmer has said the government is looking at imposing sanctions on 2 members of the Israeli government. During the Prime Minister's questions, they were described as abhorrent comments by the Finance Minister, Bezalel Smotrich, about starvation in Gaza, and the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, about settlers in the occupied West Bank. Yesterday, the former Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, was revealed that the previous government had been working on a plan to sanction the two ministers whom he described as extremists. The public inquiry into the death of Dawn Sturgis, who was poisoned by Novichok in 2018, has been hearing about the moment she and her boyfriend opened the bottle that contained the nerve agent. The inquiry was told the same bottle was likely to have been used in the assassination attempt on Sergei Skripal several months earlier, in which both he and his daughter Yulia were poisoned. From the hearing in Salisbury, our correspondent Duncan Kennedy reports.
The Nina Ricci branded perfume bottle has become one of the key pieces of evidence of the public inquiry. Charlie Rowley had found the bottle and taken it home to give to Dawn Sturgis as a present. Today, chilling details were given of when the couple removed the packaging, not knowing it contained the deadly nerve agent Novichok. Andrew O'Connor, KC for the inquiry, read Mr. Rowley's statement to police, in which he said he used a knife to prise off the plastic wrapping, spilling the oily contents in the process.
He says, when I got it on my hand, I smelt it. Didn't smell of perfume. It was oily. That's not right. I was quite covered in it, so I washed it off. Dawn swelled it on my wrist. After a minute, I went into the bathroom to see what she was doing, and I found her lying in the bath with her clothes on.
I can't tell. So this is a mix of real life footage and animation.
Later, Commander Dominic Murphy, the head of the Met's counter-terrorism operation, said he believed it was likely the bottle of perfume Charlie Rowley found was the same one used in the attack on Sergei and Yulia Skripal 4 months earlier, but that it would never be known for sure.
You're listening to the 6 o'clock news on BBC Radio 4. The main news so far. Financial analysts have predicted that interest rates will be cut twice before the end of 2024, after inflation fell below the Bank of England's 2% target for the first time in 3 years. An emergency meeting of the UN Security Council has held dire warnings about the humanitarian situation in northern Gaza. Still to come.
If we knew how you can actually manipulate the skin from not aging, we will have fewer wrinkles. All of those things that can rejuvenate organs.
Scientists create a human skin map, findings which could wonder if used to help burns victims see the signs of aging. The New England men's football manager Thomas Tuchel says he's focused on making the dream come true for the team's fans following his appointment as head coach. German will be charged from January on an 18-month contract, with his sights set on the 2026 World Cup. Sports editor Dan Rowan has the story.
It's been 8 years since the FA last unveiled a new manager of the England men's team. Today, Thomas Tuchel was at Wembley. The governing body formally confirmed that he was the latest to fill the hot seat. The German coach told me just how much it meant to have signed an 18-month contract.
This job is about football, and it is about like pushing the team to have the possibility to win the World Cup. That's what got me excited very quickly.
Having won trophies in 3 countries, Tuchel developed a passion for English football at Chelsea, where he guided his side to Champions League glory. He'll start work as England's 3rd foreign coach in January. He says he hasn't decided whether he'll sing the national anthem, so what's his message to those who are disappointed he was preferred to a homegrown coach?
I'm sorry, they should trust also the federation. We have fantastic talks, and the federation trusted me, so hopefully I can get some trust in advance, and then I have to live up to it and convince them that it was the right choice, that we can squeeze everything out of this group of players.
Former manager Gareth Southgate came close to ending England's long way to silverware before stepping down this summer. The FA say they interviewed around 10 coaches, including English candidates, but then moved quickly to end the uncertainty surrounding the team. Interim boss Lee Carsley will remain in charge of the team's next 2 fixtures before Tuchel, whose assistant will be Englishman Anthony Barry, takes over in the new year. He's tasked to reach the 2026 World Cup and end what by then will be a 60-year wait for a trophy.
The government has announced an independent review of overpayments in the carers allowance. Families have criticised the Department for Work and Pensions after they've been forced to pay thousands of pounds, having universally exceeded the earnings threshold for receiving the benefit. The review aims to understand why overpayments were made and what support the awful figures reflected. Social Affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan.
Around 1.4 million people receive carers allowance, which is worth £81.90 a week. Anyone who cares for someone for more than 35 hours a week. But if a carer also works, they must not earn more than £151 a week. on behalf of the UK, the entire benefit. Many claimants were unaware of the threshold, and the DWP is now facing 134,000 people who've been overpaid. Urged on by the Liberal Democrats and carers group, the Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall said the inquiry would look into how and why the overpayments were made and what could be done to support carers. Alan Walker, Chief Executive of Carers UK, welcomed the review and said the benefits needed a complete overhaul.
So I would like to see a fundamental review of carers allowance as we move forward. I'd definitely like to see an end to that very harsh cliff edge of going over the limit, over the very low earnings limit, and to tell carers to stay in work if they're able to and they want to.
One area the inquiry will have to look at is the culpability of the DWP itself. The department has consistently failed to act on all the amounts it receives from the tax authorities, but I claim it has earned more than it was allowed. Campaigners say this has been a significant reason some people have been allowed to build up huge debts.
The private members' bill to legalise assisted dying for people in England and Wales who are terminally ill has been formally introduced in Parliament. Legislation, which has been proposed by the Labour MP Kim Leadbeater, has said the law at present isn't fit for purpose. Opponents argue the bill would create a slippery slope, putting at risk people who are vulnerable and disabled. Our medical editor, Fergus Hall, took this report on the start of the legislation's passage through Parliament.
Terminally ill adults enter the workforce.
Second reading what day? Friday the 29th of November.
So far, we have only the title of Kim Leadbeater's bill read out today in the Commons. The full text will be published in advance of a crucial debate in 6 weeks. On a pre-vote, MPs will be asked whether they support in principle assisted dying for the terminally ill. If it clears that stage, then it would face a line-by-line examination in committee with many proposed amendments. At the last Commons vote in 2023, a similar bill was overwhelmingly rejected, although the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, then a backbencher, was one of those who supported it. The legislation is modelled on the system operating in Oregon and the US since the late 90s and more recently in New Zealand. This allows mentally competent adults deemed to have less than 6 months to live to be prescribed scientific drugs. 2 doctors and a judge in case. But despite the policy's safeguards, the potency authorising assisted suicides would be a dangerous step, urging government to instead focus on restricting the policy and its
It looks like 3 properties were destroyed, and as open space, and 2 flats were destroyed. One of them families has but the central local area lost his life. People living nearby have described her as a very nice family, and seen an empty flat just before 1 o'clock this morning. It was soon declared a major incident by the emergency services, involving specialist search and rescue and hazard response teams. 6 people taken to the hospital, the Bunbury police have described the incident as truly devastating, saying their investigations was involved in the risk of oil and gas networks and logistics at the same time. Fuel tanker has exploded in Nigeria. Ukraine's president Volodymyr Zelensky put forward what he called a victory plan, which he said could end the war with Russia by the end of next year. Finally, he believed that key elements included a full reputation of going to join NATO and lifting of restrictions on allies and resetting the Russian He dismissed the plan and called for pushing sanctions to undermine Russia. He feared
spread like this in such a way as to Russia are seeking to this is not freezing the conflict, and this is not a trade in the territory or sovereignty of Ukraine. We must implement a victory plan to force Russia to be at the peace summit and ready to end the war.
His plan included the invitation for Ukraine to join NATO, as well as for a further strengthening of his country's military. Mr. Zelensky said his proposals only required the support of his Western allies and not Russia, with Moscow continuing to occupy a fifth of his country and counting to beg for war.
The first people to have their claims for asylum in Italy assessed in Albania have arrived at an Albanian court. Frankophones who have come from what the Italian authorities deem to be safe countries, claim for asylum for illness and torture, will be processed in Albania. If applications for asylum are successful, they will then be allowed to settle in Italy. Our Balkans correspondent Brady Longman reports.
As protests go, it was quiet at the Albanian port of Schengen, but the sizable media presence at the arrival of the Italian Navy ship Libra amplified local activists' voices. Arilda Leschi says Italy's deal with Albania to offshore some of its asylum claims makes a mockery of EU values.
We're here to challenge the dominant narrative that what's happening here is an example for Europe on how to deal with illegal migration. We think it's the opposite. That's why we wrote in our banner, the European dream ends here.
Just 16 people disembarked in Schengen, living from Egypt and Bangladesh, what is considered safe countries by Italy. It's a tentative start to a deal that allows for as many as 3,000 asylum seekers at a time to stay at Italian-run facilities in Albania. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni sees her country as a pioneer.
It is a new, courageous, unprecedented path, but one that perfectly reflects the European spirit, and one that has all the makings of a good path to take with other non-EU nations as well.
The European Commission's President, Ursula von der Leyen, apparently agrees. She's written to EU leaders urging them to investigate possible return hubs outside the EU.
The aerospace giant Airbus has made plans to cut up to 2,500 jobs in its defence and space division worldwide. And employs more than 3,000 people in that division in the UK, including space systems workers in Stevenage and Portsmouth. The company said the cuts were a response to increased costs and competition from Elon Musk's SpaceX corporation. In the city, the 100 share index ended the day up 80 points at 8,329. On Wall Street a short time ago, the Dow Jones was up 256 at 42,997. On the currency market, the pound is trading at $1.30 against the euro, sterling is at €1.19.7, with the euro worth 83.6 pence. Researchers have worked out exactly how human skin is created from stem cells and grown in small amounts in the lab. In time, the information could be used to slow signs of aging, prevent scarring,